Okay, welcome back to the podcast. This is episode number 169 with my guest and composer, Rob Honstein. Rob, I met at Princeton. He lives in Princeton, and I met him through SOCI, actually, but he also teaches at NYU, where we've crossed paths several times. He's an amazing composer. He's written for SOCI before, but he also, what struck me about Rob is a piece he wrote for Doug Perkins, which was a vibraphone solo, which sounded like it may as well have been a quartet. But my friend Doug played it masterfully, and I wanted to talk to Rob a little bit about his process, his background, and that's exactly what we did. Rob's a great guy. I hope you enjoyed chatting with him. I certainly did. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Rob Honstein. Talk to you soon. Bye. He was the eternal optimist. He was always like, if I were any better, there'd be two of me.
Yeah.
So,
some people might feel like less of me would be better, though.
No, I don't know about that, Rob. Okay, I think we're good. Let me just turn it down a little bit there. Okay. Sorry, had my rig all set up I had to overdub some synth right before we chatted.
Oh,
okay.
That's exciting.
Yeah. It was exciting if I was getting it done on time and it was good.
But it's exciting to have active creative projects in the works.
Yeah, I mean, it's
something.
Well, okay, all right. Let me just make sure I got my shit together here. Let me turn off my AC. And all right.
Yeah, I did the same thing. I closed the door, which like the AC is in the other. I'm in my attic, and the AC is in the other room.
Oh,
but
no.
I closed the door to minimize the noise.
Uh-oh.
But it means as the conversation goes on, I'm going to become hotter and hotter.
Me too. So this is going to be great. We're going to lose a couple lbs while we're talking here. All right. Well, Rob, we're rolling here. Let's gavel this to order. Welcome to my podcast. I appreciate this. We've been sort of talking shit about doing this for what seems like a decade now, but I don't think we've known each other that long. But it seems like a while.
I was thinking about. I think it's been a year. I think, or it could have been 2, but I think it's a year. Because I remember we first talked about it when I saw you at SOCI at the tap room.
That's right.
Afterwards.
Yeah.
But I can't remember if that was last summer or 2 years ago.
It would have been, I think my memory serves that we hung at SOCI, and then the following fall you were teaching at NYU.
Right. So maybe it was 2 years ago then, because I've been at NYU, yeah.
The steel band played at the opening rally thing, and you came up and we started talking. Anyway, well, I'm glad we could do this. And before we get any further, I want to admit something to you. I don't know how to correctly pronounce your last name, and I would love for you to say it out loud.
No worries. Honstein.
Honstein. Let me just, I've heard a million different versions, and I know there's arguments in the world if it's Steen if it's EIN and it's Stein if it's IEN, I've seen it a million different ways. So Honstein, I appreciate you clarifying that for me.
No problem.
My names are the worst for me, and so anyway, I didn't want to say it wrong. Well, Rob Honstein, I'm really grateful for you doing this, and I think a lot of my SOCI students and colleagues, younger colleagues of mine who have commissioned you and worked with you, and of course I know about your music through just because we cross paths a lot, but I kind of want to get to know you as a person and a composer. I like doing these podcasts, and I don't have an agenda necessarily other than just to start with like Baby Rob. Take me to Baby Rob and take as quickly as you can. Well, not as quickly, but as thoughtfully as you want to be with Baby Rob to current time. Just to give us a little sense of where you came from and why you do the things you do. That'd be great. And then along the way, if we diverge and go various places, all good.
Okay. All right. Okay. That's a lot. So it's I guess I'll do the music narrative because I think that's why we're talking, but maybe there's other parts of the narrative.
Well, let me say, I like talking to people, and it doesn't have to be about music. You're a person first and foremost, and if we can just talk as people, if we talk about music, because that's what we have a lot in common with, then we can go there.
Yeah, true. Okay. Yeah, so I was born in the decade of 1980. I was born in 1980, and I grew up in mostly in Princeton, New Jersey, although I was in Pittsburgh when I was under 5, but I don't remember that at all. And I've been doing music since probably around 5 or so. My parents started me on piano, and I did that. They did classically stuff like Suzuki and then other classical stuff, and then I always did music in school, choir, and.
Did you play violin?
No, I didn't do violin.
Okay. You said Suzuki, and I just assumed because I know it's so closely related to.
No, but they
sounds.
have a Suzuki piano thing as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Do they start you off on a
So
really tiny piano?
that's funny. No, that's a good joke. Yeah, no, very specific for anyone who does Suzuki
Yeah,
strings.
that's an inside
That joke.
baseball joke there. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, regular size piano. And so that was sort of my musical world for most of my upbringing. But I think I had just a pretty standard suburb upbringing. Doing like various sports and music, and pretty straightforward. And then I guess I kept, the way I felt about it was music was like the one thing that I kept coming back to. Like I always was drawn to it. Maybe I stopped doing one thing or another thing, but it just always stuck with me. And then around the start of high school, I guess I kind of had my opening up moment because I had a real falling out with the piano teacher. It was getting a little intense. She was sort of pushing me to do things I didn't want to do, like do competitions.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I loved it, but I just didn't want to do that. And so I remember a very explosive moment where I literally stormed out of the lesson. I don't think I've ever done anything like this since, but I screamed at her. I was like, I don't remember what I said, but I was screaming and I had enough and I just walked out. And I just waited for my mom to come and pick me up.
That's amazing.
On the
I wish
side
I had.
streets.
I don't have a storm out moment in my life. Maybe that I don't know what that says about me. Maybe I'm just I don't stand up to authority when I should or what. But I just have never stormed out. I think I had a moment with a teacher in grad school, but it didn't really happen until I was like 25, where he looked me in the face. Bob Van Sysum was like, you're never going to play in an orchestra, right?
right.
And I said,
right.
he was like, you're going to play backyard parties or you're going to take timpani auditions. Which is it going to be? And I was like, well, I'm going to play backyard parties. And he said, okay, good. I'm glad we had this chat. But it wasn't a storm out and walk out moment,
Because I'm a fan of your podcast, I've heard you tell the story already.
Sorry.
No, it's fine.
I have like 4 stories and I tell them over and over and over.
It's great. You're a good storyteller, Josh. I think it works for you. But that's the way I heard that story, though. It's not so much. It didn't sound like you were going to storm. You're going to blow up at him. It sounds like it ended up being a positive sort of revelation, like you figured something out. Or maybe that's just
I was far
back, the way you tell it now, 2020. But maybe in the moment you were really pissed.
In the moment, I think I was really pissed, but I also was. I mean, again, like I'm just to clarify. Like you were how old when this happened to you?
Like 13.
13. I was 25, 24, 25.
Okay.
So like my prefrontal cortex was a little more formed to be able to deal with that sort of criticism. So while it knocked me back on my heels, I was a little bit like, well, he's not wrong. I do play more backyard parties than I study Beethoven
That's true,
excerpts,
and that sounds like that's like a way more positive way to deal with it than I did, which I think I felt like a total failure. Like I feel like I was just like, oh, I couldn't do this thing that I was being pushed to do. I guess I'm terrible at it. Was sort of the way I interpreted it. But the thing is, it didn't end music for me. It actually just set me in a different direction, which I'm grateful for because I think it set me up for where I am now. Yeah. Which is that I kind of quit the classical piano thing. And even though it's kind of all I knew, and I tried other things. I was playing in like a rock band. I started getting into jazz, and it kind of opened up my world. And it was actually probably in hindsight the best thing because there was a couple years in there where I didn't really have any lessons or any kind of teacher, and I guess it allowed me to figure some things out for myself. But I guess when you spend the formative years of your life playing a certain type of music, which was for me classical music, inevitably I came back to it because by the end of high school I was interested in it again, but in a totally different way. And I'd been getting into jazz and doing a lot of that stuff, which sort of got me into more like experimental music. And I guess through that route, I kind of was like started getting interested in more like avant-garde classical or whatever. Although it's not that avant-garde. At the time I was like, someone showed me like 12-tone music and I was like, whoa, this is crazy. Like, you could do that? It sounds so gnarly. So
I remember being shown 12-tone music for the first time, and my first thought was like, why in the hell would anyone do this? Like, why does anyone want to avoid the 4 chord? What's wrong with you people?
In the rock band world, I was getting really into like punk rock and like hardcore music, and like I loved that for the energy of it, but I also loved it just because of the sort of fuck you element to. And then I interpreted the 12-tone thing as the same kind of thing, like a sort of fuck you to like, traditional harmony and all that. Well, I think that's why I got into it.
I'm sorry to interrupt. You said you got to sort of experimental contemporary music or avant-garde music through jazz. Like you went, if I'm sort of understanding your lineage here, like pretty heavily steeped in classical music, and then through jazz you got sort of exposed, which I guess doesn't surprise me. Jazz is a very experimental art form, historically speaking, and still today is one of the most like, I mean, I think there are arguments around that, and I'm not steeped enough in it to know truly, but my perception is that jazz is one of the art forms that takes the biggest risks and is willing to sort of do crazy stuff. And Ornette Coleman and Don Cherry, and like there's a whole slew of people. I mean, of course there's Count Basie, and all of that stuff is under the umbrella of jazz, but it doesn't shock me that you got there through you got to contemporary music through that.
Yeah, and I'm not going to try to speak with any authority on jazz either, because but I think that's how I felt, and I think you're right. I think there's some truth, a lot of truth to that. But for me at the time, I mean, I was so sheltered. Like you have to understand, like until 7th grade, the only thing I listened to were like tapes my piano teacher gave me. Like I really feel like
my parents. How old are you, Rob? Remind me.
I'm turning 40.
So I just turned 41, and like my entire musical upbringing was the BMG Music Club, where you order like for 1 penny you got 14 CDs. But that's when my mom was like, they're sending us a bill every 3 weeks, right? And, but when that stack of 10 CDs came, that you didn't know, like you picked 2 of them, and then they sent you like 12 surprise ones. That's how I learned about Weezer. That's how I learned about like a lot of music that I got my first Mickey Hart CD through that or whatever.
Totally.
So anyway, just to say, like, I think we grew up in sort of similar parallel trajectories in terms of how music got to us.
Yeah, like my parents were not musicians at all, and they didn't even really listen to music in the house, actually.
What did they do?
In hindsight. At this point they're basically retired, but they had an evolution. My mom, they were both civil engineers to start, and then my mom sort of went. She stopped working after my sister. I'm the oldest, so she stopped working after my sister was born, after her second child. Okay. And then my dad sort of gradually transitioned from being a civil engineer to more of like, he went into like work for a real estate development company. Okay. And then he transitioned to actually working for like investing, but like with real estate stuff. So now he kind of had the arc, and now he kind of ended up doing more of like financy stuff. Okay. But they weren't, I mean, they liked music, but it just wasn't part of what they were doing, Yeah. So I don't know how. I guess they just thought piano was something that one could do, so they threw me on it, and it stuck. But really, I was only listening to that narrow thing, and I do really distinctly remember in 7th grade going out to get Nirvana, Nevermind, and that felt like, whoa, that completely changed everything for me. As listening to all this like piano music, and then it's like that like stuff like grunge or whatever.
Yeah.
But anyway, So then I started trying to write, notate and getting into classical stuff. And I think by the end of high school, it was like this real mix of, ranging from trying to do like jazz stuff and then like writing down compositions in like this weird 12-tone way. And I think that's kind of where things started to coalesce.
Well, can I ask you real quick again? Sorry to interrupt again, Rob. But I feel like we jumped from like you were playing piano to now you're writing stuff. You're writing 12-tone stuff down. Like where can we go back to where you decided like, wait, you can compose music? I didn't realize that was a thing. When did that happen?
No, okay, so that was gradual. So I lied a bit when I said I didn't have lessons, because actually after I quit my classical lessons, about a year later, my mom hooked me up with this jazz piano teacher. Okay. And I went for a lesson with him, and the first lesson he sat me down and he said, "All right, play something in C major." And I had this like panic attack, I was like, what do you mean? Like I can't play anything. Like there's no music in front of me. This is not computing, right? And so that was, I think, a moment where it occurred to me that like I could just make stuff up, and it took a while, I think, to get from like literally being frozen to like having the ability to like kind of just make stuff up. And I think so that was one important step. The second important step was I started playing in this band, and I really remember it starting in this very kind of cavalier way. It was just 4 friends of us, freshman year in high school. The 3 of them were already playing music together. They needed a bass player, and I, without having touched the bass, said, "Yeah, no problem, I can do that. It's easy." Because I figured, like in like a lot of like pop songs, I was just thinking to myself, "Oh yeah, they just play like some simple quarter notes." Or like
I need 3 notes. I need 3 notes.
Yeah.
A root, a fourth, and a fifth.
Exactly. No offense to bass players, that's totally ignorant. But at my 14-year-old self, I just very confidently said, "Yeah, no problem, I got it." So we had our first rehearsal, and yeah, you could play. I could figure out the three notes I needed to play. But then, in a similar fashion, during that rehearsal, I was like, let's write our own songs. And I, again, in the way that only like a child can say it, I just was like, yeah, no problem. You can write a song. It's easy.
Mm-hmm.
No, all you got to do is make up three notes and then make up some words on top of it, and you're done.
Yeah.
And so that was the attitude with which we started writing songs
Just
together.
to be clear,
And
I don't. Yeah, 40. I don't know that that's a terrible attitude, actually. Just to
No,
approach
and
things that you're afraid of.
I have to say, like, I think I've gone through an arc of like starting in that place of being like, yeah, whatever. It's easy
Right.
to, you go through school and you learn stuff and you start to feel like, oh my God, I have to have all this technique. I have to trying to like come out on the other side with a little bit more of that sense of just like whatever you like, just try to do it,
Well, and just like finding a place to start is the hardest thing to do, and just like starting the ball rolling oftentimes is the biggest hurdle to jump over.
Absolutely.
So if pretending like you know what you're doing is a way to get the ball rolling, then do it, I say.
Yeah.
As long as you're not going to hurt
absolutely.
anybody. I don't think...
No, true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so those two things, the band and then trying to get into improvising, I think got me to feeling like I could write music. And then, I don't know, I grew up in Princeton, which you know well, and there's a lot of people in the air. Like, somehow I got hooked up with this guy who had got like a PhD in composition at Princeton, and I don't know where he taught, but somehow I don't remember how it happened, but someone suggested, why don't you go study with him? He'll teach you counterpoint. And so I guess around sophomore year of high school, I started like just getting like counterpoint lessons with him, which is in hindsight very strange because I don't think that's typical, and I think I was lucky that I just had someone in the area that could do that.
Yeah.
So I think that those three things, like actually like working on counterpoint and like writing songs for the band and starting to get more comfortable improvising in like a jazz context, I think those three things really led me to feeling like I could write music, and also starting to like think about writing as like notes on a page, because for the band there's no notes. It's just like writing lyrics and chords, or maybe coming up with riffs or whatever on the guitar or the bass, and just going into practice and working it out. It wasn't written down in that way, but
well, it's very similar to like, I mean, just to be blunt, the way most of the world learns and teaches music. Like almost like Dave Grohl does, probably, I'm guessing, does not hand out sheet music to the rest of the Foo Fighters, and neither does Tom York. It's all, I'm guessing, I'm projecting here, and
Johnny Greenwood might.
Maybe. But it's like if you go to like Trinidad, or you go to Ghana, or you go to parts of Spain where Basque drumming is a thing. Like it's not written. Nobody's printing out Sibelius PDFs.
Yeah.
Like it's all taught by rote, and that's the way bands. I mean, there's a big argument right now about music theory and the way people are being taught in universities, and I think it's a legit argument to have. But just to say that, like, you were learning by a rote style of teaching, which is as legitimate an art form or style of learning as anything else. It's different.
Absolutely, totally. And I think there's so much value to it. And I think the fact that I tried to do that for a little bit played a big role in like just expanding my horizon and expanding like how I could create music. Because, I do think that, I totally agree. But that cocktail of things was, I guess, what led me into writing things down. And, so I started doing it. Although I might have tried earlier, but I've forgotten, because I have found some old things from or even earlier, where I looked like I was trying to write something, like little melodies, like on old manuscript. I must have been in middle school, but I literally don't remember that at all. I just found it, so the evidence exists, but it must not have had much of an impact.
Well,
because
so
I gave it up.
As you were going through high school. Where along the line did you transition into being like, this is fun, this is cool, like I like taking lessons, I like doing this, to like, your mom and dad are civil engineers, your dad ends up in finance and real estate, like, my mom was a French and Spanish teacher, trilingual. My dad sold big rig trucks, like 18-wheelers, and sold soda his whole life. So like, there was no discouragement of being a musician in my family. I mean, there was like, you're not going to make any money, that sort of thing, but nobody ever stopped me. But it wasn't like from day one I was seeing people in the professional music arts, as an example. Yeah. And so for me, it was a little bit of a like, well, no one I know does this. Except for my band director, let me ask her how to do it. How did you make that decision?
That's a good point. I in hindsight, I must have had some people that started to become role models, if you think about it that way. And because I I think once I quit the piano teacher, that's sort of a divide, I think, between the early childhood and then what became, I think, my adult life. And I think as I got into high school, I think there were a couple key teachers that I think probably started to make it seem like give a model for what it could be like to be a musician. You know, and there's one person in particular who I never actually really studied composition with. I'd say two. This jazz piano teacher guy and this guy, his name's Paul Hoffreiter.
Okay.
He was a teacher at, so I ended up at the high school I went to. And I don't know, somehow he's just a really inspirational person and just an incredible musician. I'd never met anyone like this who could, just one of these people with this amazing facility who could sort of like improvise anything at the piano, whether it be like a fugue or like some contemporary thing. He could like write. He didn't have to use a computer. He could just like write. Like it was like he thought it. He wrote it. But at the same time, he was just so down to earth, so caring and giving and like interested, and just really I felt exuded this passion for not just music but specifically composition and like the whole thing of like the craft of composition and whatnot. And I think that really just totally resonated with me and became like a kind of model. And then the other one, I guess, would probably be the piano teacher, this guy, Laurie Altman, who he was more of a jazz pianist, but he also composed and stuff. But, he had a life in music. And I don't know what it was, but probably by like 14 or 15, I think the idea of being a musician was starting to form. If I wasn't thinking about it consciously, it was starting to form. Because by the end of high school, I definitely was thinking of it consciously. I was definitely thinking, I want to be a musician. I want to study this. Like, I want to do this. I don't know if I was conceiving of it like for the rest of my life, but I was definitely thinking of like, I want to do this. Like, there's not like I'm not going to get another. I wasn't thinking I'm going to go try to become a doctor or get some other job. I was thinking I want to do music as much as I can.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember those moments like when I was in college of like, did I ever say I'm going to do this for the rest of my life? And I guess I don't. I guess the answer is yes. I did say that, but I think now in hindsight, what I was actually saying is I'm going to do this for the rest of today, for sure.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah,
I'm definitely committed to this for the rest of today.
Yeah.
And when I wake up tomorrow, if I don't feel that way again, I won't do it. And I just kept waking up and being like, I'm committed to this to the end of the day. And it's like, still at 41, I wake up and I'm like, I'm all in for so percussion at least until I go to bed tonight.
That's great. That's like, a good attitude.
Maybe, I don't know, but it's one I think that now, especially now in 2020, where everything is day to day, I'm like, that's right. At least until end of business today, I am definitely still in so percussion.
That is so great because I think if we could talk for a while about the last 4 months and what that's been, but I think one interesting thing that happened, I think probably for a lot of us and me, was just like, a different relationship to your practice because so many external things were just disappeared, and now it's like, okay, what does it mean? Like, what am I doing, and what does it mean when I don't have all these other things that I was doing it for?
Well, for you though, I don't mean to get us sidetracked here, but this is interesting because I think I do want to talk about this because we don't need to go down any particular sticky rabbit holes unless we want to, but I do want to zoom out a little bit and just look at these 4 months and say, like, talk about how it's affected your practice, because I think anybody who's listening to this, whether you're a composer or somebody auditioning for orchestras or or you're a civil engineer like your parents, I'm sure everybody over the last 4 months has had to reevaluate what their practice is and what works and what doesn't anymore. I can certainly go into detail on my personal sort of the things that felt like a cold splash of water for me, but I'm curious, Rob, for you, what are the big picture things that you just like, oh man, I had to retool this thing pretty quickly?
Right. So I don't think I ended up having to retool much. I think, though, because I'll get into it, because there were a couple of things. First of all, the thing that had to change was the sort of orientation towards performances, right? Like, I have like a series of, say, projects that we're working toward, like I had a premiere in August lined up. There's a couple of things that premieres are going to happen this fall. Those all been delayed.
Composers have shows too. It's just when other people are playing shows. Like if other people don't have shows, then neither do you.
So those are all gone, and that's really big to a composer. Like you work really hard on a piece for a long time, and like the premiere is really special. Although I have a whole thing. I think the premiere is actually
the percentage of time that I'm on stage playing music during a So Percussion show is 100% of the time. The
Yeah.
percentage of time I'm on stage playing, say, Caroline Shaw's music is only about 15% of that time. So in terms of
Right.
your
Right.
involvement, like the bang for your buck on a concert stage, if that concert
Yeah.
doesn't get played and you were only at you and it felt great to even just be 15% of that show,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
It's
like
it, it hurts.
it's harder to
Yeah.
claw that back.
In a way, it hurts, but then in another way, it was fine because like nothing was canceled; it was postponed. I'm still writing the pieces, so like it's just like deferred, but it's this weird like deferral of gratification. It's like, oh, okay, so all those things I was expecting and looking forward to and working towards, they're now happening like over a year or more away,
Right.
and now what's happened? And then also other it's not premieres, but like other things that were going to happen, other concerts, other like things maybe I was going to go to and or whatever, all gone. And so now everything becomes just almost like in a way interior. Like it immediately poses the question like, who are you doing this for?
Right.
Like,
right.
are you doing this for the performance? Are you doing this for the commission? Are you doing this for yourself in the sense of like this is how you want to fill the days? I mean, so on the one hand, like, yeah, I do have these obligations because these projects were commissions, but like now they're not due for a really long time. So like I don't necessarily have to do it. So like right now, but the thing that I think maybe it saved me or maybe it just made me avoid the question is like very serendipitously, another project emerged right around the same time as the pandemic, which was I'm working on a film score, which I've never done before. But the way it works is that I'm only really creating mock-ups and demos. And so for the last like 4 months, I've essentially written like hours of music for this film. And like, but I'm doing it in my computer and sending demos back and forth with the director, and we're getting the final like mock-up. And but like it doesn't rely on other people at this point. So like in a way it was like, oh, here I can now just pour myself into this and write, and there's like a deadline and there's like feedback, and like I don't need anything but my computer and and myself. So
well, can I ask you? Can I ask you a little bit about? Let's try to be real objective about your stuff you've written for that film score. And I'm asking you this not with it's not going to sound like a loaded question, but or it's going to sound like a loaded question, but my intent is not as such. But given the extreme limitations that has been put on you against your will, against all of our wills, with this lockdown and quarantine, do you feel how would you judge your output relative to the pre-limitation moment of your life? What's better and what's worse about the material you created?
It's more than the moment of right now. It's more a function of working with this film project, which has been a totally different way of working than anything I've done before. And actually, I think it's been just a tremendous positive. Like I'm so grateful for this project. It's been an unbelievable like learning experience, and I think it's really opened me up creatively to working in different ways because. First of all, I've had to work so much faster than I've ever had to work. I've had to essentially work with. It's like having two. When you write your own piece as a composer, it's like you kind of decide everything, and obviously there's a dialogue with the musicians and a collaboration about a lot of respect just about like what works and what doesn't work, but not as often about like. Do you think this should be longer or shorter? Do you think like this is really the right tone for this moment? Do like these really more like. Like authorial choices, like, but working with a director, it's had to be that way. Like, you had to go really back and forth about like what the tone of something should be. Like, should it be less or more of the instrumentation? Should it be longer, or shorter, faster, or so? Like, there's like another composer in the room, and I've had to be flexible and adjust, and that's been really good for me actually. Like, I don't necessarily want to work this way always, but like to have this other voice in my head and helping shape what I'm doing has been really good because. I just think it's more collaborative. It's like kind of breaks open my process a bit, which I think will help me when I go back to just doing it by myself, I guess.
Well, it seems clear. Again, like I'm making a snap judgment here based on the way you're talking about it, but it seems clear to me that the director you're working with is someone who doesn't have like tyrannical say over what happens.
No,
but I'm curious.
No.
I've worked with a few. So has done a few tiny little snippets of film scores. We did a thing for this show, M. Night Shyamalan movie called Split.
Oh, cool.
And then we did some stuff for The Jinx, that thing about Robert Durst.
Oh yeah, cool.
And we've done some stuff work with dancers too. And sometimes the critique that comes back towards you as the composer is different than a critique you might get, say, at like a from me at like a soci, if I were to come in and coach one of your pieces, something I might say to you in that room might be like, Rob, I think like you have a real hocketing moment here that you want to have players 1 and 3 hock at really fast stuff, but player 1 is on vibraphone and player 3 is on, a really tiny desk bell. So maybe if you maybe put them both on vibraphone and put them both on glockenspiel or some sort of middle ground, that hocket will come across, and then you and I can.
Right.
It's more of a just like nuts and bolts. But with directors and films, I often feel like the critique is less that and more of a like this needs to feel more inspirational. This needs to feel a little bit more depressing. We are leading towards a feeling of ecstatic spectacle, and like those are things I'm like, wait a minute, those aren't in like orchestration books. What the fuck does that mean?
But isn't that awesome? Isn't that like liberating and like kind of like?
I guess what I'm saying is yes to a degree, but if I'm not skilled, it's like learning by rote a little bit. Like if you're not skilled in that practice, it can feel like, wait a minute, you're asking me to lift that 50-pound weight and I've only got 10-pound muscles. I haven't used the
Oh, absolutely, and I can't tell you how many times. I mean. So this has been like a 4-month process. I've written more music in 4 months than I think I've ever written in my life. And I've probably written between 2 and 3 hours of material, and we've now whittled it down to about 70 minutes of stuff like that we're going to use.
Yeah.
And even so, there's about 40 cues in the film. It's a feature-length film. And each time, I think I got the first feedback back, I had a moment where I felt inside like I wanted to punch a hole in the wall or something. Like, what do you mean it's not inspirational enough? This is great stuff. Like, I cannot come up with something new. This is impossible. It's
this
like,
needs to be more exciting. You're like, wow, what does that mean?
Yes, like, you have no idea how cool that harmony change is 30 seconds in.
Do you know that I inverted that German augmenting 6th chord and put it on its head and referenced Rite of Spring here? You clearly don't.
Right, but how amazing it is to have someone who doesn't give a shit about that and only cares about how it feels and how it's like serving the story, because like ultimately that's what matters. And especially in the context of a film, like absolutely technical things matter totally zero. I mean, they matter in the extent of like, can it be executed in a recording session? If you're having a recording session, like that matters. Like it needs to be playable and whatnot.
Yeah.
But like the fact that you did some cool counterpoint thing or some like interesting like subtle structure thing or like some special texture that like you find really like sophisticated and cool, that it doesn't matter at all if it's not doing what it needs to do. I find that liberating.
Sorry, it's interesting that you bring that I'm glad that you have that. It's inspiring to me that you have that feeling because not that I don't agree. I think on the spectrum, I'm a little bit more left or right of center in terms of the feelings about that, because it can get, or at least I understand why. Maybe I just haven't had super great experiences with it, but it is something that forces you out of your like mode of operating. And I do think it's important just to think about, like, you have preconceptions about the way pacing works or flow works, or you think your thing works a certain way. I gotta say, one of the film scores that blew my mind the most, and if anybody listens to this, they may give me some shit, and if you want to give me shit, Rob, go for it, is the film score to Mystic River.
Okay, I don't know it well enough to give you shit.
Do you know the film? Do you know the film?
Not really.
It's with Sean Penn. Do you know who directed it?
No.
Clint Eastwood. Do you know who Do you know who wrote the music?
No.
Clint Eastwood.
Oh, no shit. He wrote
and
music?
It is 3 notes. Wow. It's do, re, ti, do. That's it. The whole time. Very slowly. And under any part of, and when you put that under some, he lightly reharmonizes it in some cases, but it's like ba 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 ba, like the whole time. And when that theme, when you remove the idea of like a leitmotif that is attached to an emotion or a person or a character or whatever, or a tragedy, like it has this weird, it starts to take on, it makes all of the events a little bit more banal, and there's something very disturbing about that to me. So, yes. Do I think Clint Eastwood is an amazing composer? No. But I do think in that moment, he knew as a composer exactly what he wanted the music to feel like. And I do think that's a good time. It's a good moment to look at, like, oh, yeah, music does serve a purpose. It's not just subservient. It can actually make the whole plot, the whole darkness that's happening in this movie mean something completely different, even in the hands of a composer like Clint Eastwood. And so if Clint Eastwood can do that, then certainly you as a composer, no matter what you feel your limitations are or the imposter syndrome you have, you can actually write music that has a huge effect on every shot that every shot that the director made when there was no music, you know, like that. You're recontextualizing the art that a director or, you know, a cinematographer has made. So anyway, that was a long-winded thing just to say, like, it's an important thing to tackle, and I'm glad that for you in this current, I mean, for me in this pandemic, the thing that I feel that was serendipitous, I don't know if it was serendipity, but when the lockdown happened, I realized really quickly that I had made, like, every decision in my life, leading, at least in So Percussion, my formative adult years when I graduated grad school, were based around traveling with So. I'm out of town half the year. Every piece of clothing I purchased, was it comfortable on a plane? Is my suitcase going to last a long time? Is, like, my toothbrush, is this a good DOP kit that I'm carrying? Like, all of that shit. You know, and all of a sudden, and commuting, you know, like what food I eat, where I eat, when I eat, you know, all of those things. All of a sudden now I'm home all day.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how to do this. And the only thing I knew how to do was press record on my podcast mic. And so from day one, I was like, I don't know, I'm just going to talk to people. And I got to say, it was something like that, reaffirming that part of my, like, belief system, which is like, I got to be able to talk to people. If I can't do that, I will not be able to do anything else. I did like almost 100 podcasts in the like 5 or 6 weeks of the lockdown, and then
holy shit, you've done so many.
But then we had to take Soci online, and I realized in that, like, the very first Soci, I was like, oh yeah, that's why I was doing all these podcasts, because now I have to run Soci like this.
And you got it.
And if I hadn't, well, I was better at it. I had been lifting that weight and building those muscles without realizing necessarily why, because now we're in this new world where if you can't figure out the pacing of a conversation like this, if you don't know when and how to interrupt somebody without feeling aggressive, if you can't read tone over this, then we're all fucked. You know, if we can't figure out how to do that. And I realized it's like, oh, I can actually. And I realized that I can't actually manage those conversations in a healthy way when there's more than 3 or 4 people on the call. And that took me so many times of trying to do that, of failing miserably, before I realized I'm just not going to do it. It's like getting in my car and somebody being like, sorry, you got to drive with an eye patch. You have 5 people in the car. And I'm like, well, no, that's not safe for anybody in the car. No, I just won't drive. Find somebody else, you know.
Dude, that's so interesting. I have never thought about Zoom calls in the way of, like, trying to figure out how you judge tone, how you figure out the right way to interrupt. But that's a really good point, because, like, do you feel like, I'm just thinking about it now for the first time, but do you feel like your brain hurts a little bit trying to, like, have a conversation? And precisely that point, like, when is the right time to interject, jump in? Because, like, in real life, the signals are happening faster, like, and there's also more of that, like, you know, like, so, like, I feel like, just like as in there's a little time lag in the sound, and, like, I need to, like, pause a little bit before I actually say something, because, like, I'm not sure you're going to hear it as fast as I would if we were face to face. It's like, I think I'm constantly on just, like a sort of alert of, like, when is the right, you know what I mean?
Well, I think the thing that I feel like, and I just tried to demonstrate it there, is, like, I could sense that you were coming to the end of your thought, but I wasn't quite sure, but I had to commit to knowing that. And if I didn't, if I just went like, well, wait, go ahead, yep. Wait, go ahead.
Get in this loop.
Then that's like, it's clear to everybody, especially on a pod. Like, the thing is the first, I don't know, like, of the 100 or so that I did, it was only the last, like, 5 or 6 that I started filming. And on an audio-only podcast, it's really telling to people that I'm awkward and interrupting, because there's a lot of apologies going on. Like, oh, I'm sorry. No, you go ahead. You go ahead. But what they don't see is me trying to figure out, like, I can tell when you look away from the camera that you're really thinking deeply about something. And I know when you finish up your thought, you look back at the camera. And that you're not the only person who does this, Rob. This is called human. I mean, when we think about things, we go, huh. And then when I'm like, yeah, you know, like, I think the less I start to feel confident about what I'm about to say, I start to zone back to you, because I'm looking to you for help. And that's something that I do it. Every human being does it. And it's something, it's like the one tiny thing I've picked up on after 100 podcasts is, like, everybody, when they're basically done talking, looks back at me. It's like a tag team wrestling match, you know, but that's not what you do in real life. Mm-hmm. You know, we're constantly, like, in real life, I can reach out and put my hand on your shoulder and be like, oh, but Rob, like this, you know, and you'll know that anyway, but it's a skill set. And I think it's something that I see atrophying on Facebook really bad. Mm-hmm. I am shocked at the conversations I see people I know having on Facebook.
You mean just like the comments kind of back and forth?
Any
that
of
sort
it,
thing.
any
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah.
There's just there's no attempt. There's not. I mean, I don't think you're able to necessarily, but there's no attempt at reading tone. There's actually a perception that tone doesn't matter, and that intent doesn't matter. And to me, that sort of, whether we're talking about colonialist music theory or who to vote for in November, or whether Subway's $5 footlongs are worth their money. Like, it doesn't matter what we're talking about. It ends up devolving into you're a good person and you're a bad person really quick.
So hard to navigate that space.
When I talk to the same people on Zoom, that doesn't even enter the equation, and I'm just sort of like, what?
I know.
There's something that everybody needs to be absolved of, which is the lizard brain in us that just cannot deal with the uncanny valley of social media. And I'm, for me, just sort of reassessing a little bit about my process. I think I'm realizing that I just need to care less about social media. I need to invest in it less. Like,
you mean like spend less time of it, or like interact with it in a way where you give less of a shit?
Both, I think.
Okay.
I think to me, it's investing less in people's stuff. Like, when I see somebody say something, even if I disagree with it vehemently, it's trying to be better at knowing what power do I have in this conversation? Can I change anybody's mind? Have I ever changed anybody's mind on Facebook? And I actually think the answer is no. And so I'm just trying better just to not engage with stuff. And the thing that's funny is, like, the number of times I offer for people to come on the podcast and talk about things that they want to talk on Facebook, they never do.
That's interesting.
And
I've always had a hard time. I've always had a hard time with it. I mean, I think I'm just sort of fundamentally not really oriented well for like social media conversation. I mean, I use it. I'll post stuff occasionally, but mostly I stick to just like maybe saying something funny, or maybe trying to say something like positive, or maybe sharing my own work, which I do. But like, I really just can't do discussions and arguments, because I find that the way I think, for better or worse, is like it takes me a long time to sort of formulate my thoughts. I like to think about it from many different angles. Like, I'm not good at just saying something pithy and concise, and like, so that's why Twitter, it's terrible. Like, I don't like, there are some people who are really good at it, and I'm like impressed. It's like a skill. Like, it's kind of like a poetry of rhetoric or something, where it's just like they can, in such short amount of words, say something very insightful and blah blah blah. I can't do it. Like, anything I want to say, it's gonna be like at least a 5 tweet thread or whatever.
Well, there's also, I mean, there's I agree with you, but there's also like, I would say there's probably 5. Like, if I really had to think about it, there's probably about 5 people on the planet who I feel like use Twitter effectively and like and thoughtfully. But there's also about 5 people on the planet who, over Memorial Day weekend, can eat 72 Nathan's hot dogs in 10 minutes. That doesn't mean that we should all need to be like striving for that goal. If everybody else is eating 10 and throwing up violently, then maybe we should stop for 2 seconds and be like, let's shut down let's stop demanding that we get our news from Twitter. It's a hot dog eating contest, and there's a few people who can shove them all in there and not throw up for 5 minutes, and I'm just not one of them. Well, I want to pivot a little bit here, because there is a piece of music that doesn't involve Twitter or social media that kind of blew my mind of yours, and again, I've only heard it a couple times through Doug, and it was a vibraphone solo that you wrote for Doug Perkins. And I'm curious if you would be willing to talk about that, and maybe a little bit of just to sort of round out the conversation here, a little bit maybe about what you're working on other than the film score. But can you tell me a little bit about that vibe solo for Doug? Because I know Doug, and I know his hands aren't that fast, so I'm curious if you... if you had Doug overdub everything really slowly and then just speed it up on the back end. But can you tell me a little bit about the process of working on that?
Okay, so I will say at the end of the day, he really... No, it's cool. Anything I'm about to say, I've already said to him, so it's no problem. But at the end of the day, he recorded that. There was no speeding up. He got it. He did it. There were definitely overdubs in certain parts. There was, as one does, taking sections, blah, blah, blah.
Sure, yeah.
But he could play the notes. And he's performed it. He's performed it a couple times. But I think this whole thing started with a fundamental misunderstanding I had about him as a musician.
That he was good?
So, that he was any good. So, I saw him, there was like 5 years ago, I think, probably, or whatever. I was at PASIC, and there was this like rogue PASIC show in Indianapolis, at some venue in like Fountain Square, and
Mm-hmm.
like Doug played and some other people played, and it was like a sort of like small, like, cramped DIY kind of space, a lot of people there. And Doug got up there and he played XY by Michael Gordon, and I found it to be an absolutely just like transcendent performance. I was right there, right next to him. He was so focused, so into it. He just completely nailed it. He had that down like it was just in his bones. And I was just like so captivated by his ability to just command and like draw everyone in and just deliver this like really relentless, virtuosic piece that requires stamina and like a kind of intense focus to deliver it over.
He does play the snot out of that piece in particular. I mean,
It's,
just
yeah,
and just to be
amazing.
clear, anybody who thinks I genuinely don't like or love or care about Doug and think he's good, you're out of your minds. Doug is amazing,
Yeah.
and he's one of my
Oh,
one of my buddies. So anyway, just a disclaimer.
So anyway, so I just took away from that feeling like Doug can do this, and by this I meant take a difficult piece of music that requires focus, virtuosity, stamina, and he can own it, and he can like just deliver that to an audience in a way that's going to just whoosh, suck you in.
Agreed.
So that was my starting point about Doug. And then, as I often do, if someone's asking me to write for like an individual, I like to think about what are they good at, what are they known for, blah blah blah. And then I think this is the trickster in me. I think, it could be interesting to challenge that, to say try to like engage a side of them which maybe isn't as common, in terms of what they present. So I guess with Doug, I was like, yeah, he does X Y. He does a lot of like this more like multi percussion or whatever. But like I thought so I just thought like mallets. I was like I'm gonna do. I don't see him doing like four mallets like stuff very often. He does in like a chamber context, but it's not his solo jam as much. So there lies the problem, because maybe there's a reason he doesn't do it as much. Sorry, Doug. No.
Well, the mallets are something. Doug and I have a very similar. Mallets. I just have never understood why anybody writes for mallets.
They're fucked up.
Well, it's just like you have 88 little tiny drums, and everybody's like, it's like a huge multiple setup, except every drum's this skinny. And you have two big blunt objects you're supposed to be very accurate with.
It's so crazy, like, when you really think about it. Like, it's such a Rube Goldberg, like, impossible way to play an instrument. Like, you strike it from, like, a foot above, and you're just, like, praying that you hit the right thing. Like, it's...
Well, not everybody prays. I'm the one that prays to hit the right notes. Most people
No,
are pretty
I know.
okay
People figure it out. But just, like, obviously, like, playing a piano or a violin, it's just something that makes so much more sense. It's like you're right there. It's like...
You're touching it. You're
touching it.
You're in constant...
You're touching it.
The only part of
Why would you... Yeah.
The only part of my body that's touching the vibraphone is the foot.
Yeah,
and
right.
that's like,
good point.
That's a trick. It just is. You're not. It's just a very disorienting. You're not oriented where you should be.
But anyway, so I kind of launched on that vibraphone piece, thinking I'm going to write this really hard, long thing that's just like totally going to require this huge commitment, but it's going to be for four mallets, and so like that was a bit of a struggle, like because I think that I ended up writing things that weren't necessarily in his wheelhouse. But on the other hand, I think that was cool, and I think like whereas like he's not maybe going to play the harder, more virtuosic movements, like that might not be the thing he plays for the rest of his life, but some of the movements I think he's going to hold on to and keep doing. But I think overall, like I don't want to speak for him, but I think it was part of the process that I did challenge him, I think became interesting. And as it works out, now that the piece is over, there are plenty of other people who can do the shredding mallets, and they've taken to it and they love it. But that's how I got to the point of writing that type of a piece for Doug, because of that experience and thinking I wanted to sort of do something that was maybe a little bit out of his comfort zone.
Was there anything that you had to change, or that with you and Doug that you went back and forth? Because what I know, again, just all the joking aside about Doug, one thing I do know about Doug and the way So collaborates is like, here's what you wrote. In this, and I feel now I'm more comfortable saying like, here's what you wrote. Don't change it. It's just really hard, and I suck at this. At this, and I'll do the best I can. You're just gonna have to trust me that 10 years from now, players aren't gonna have a problem with this. And then there's the thing that's like, I think this is hard enough where you need to give players 10 years from now just a hair of a break if you want your music played. A lot, and again, it's like, and if your answer is no, play it that way, that's what I want, then the answer is like, okay, fine, totally great. And I think having those discussions along the way is always healthy. For you, was there anything that you did actually change because of butting up against the vibraphone and its realities?
Oh my God, a ton of things, so many things, and that's why I love that part of the process. I'm definitely always looking to find the best solution, which is like the best way to express my ideas in the most like efficient, technical way possible. And very rarely is there a situation where I feel like I say, no, you have to keep it. You can't do it any other way. That's really quite rare. I mean, maybe it happened a few times, but I like solving problems. I almost always think that there's another way to do it, or like if the idea had four components, and I was convinced that it had to have those four components to express the idea, I almost always discover that actually you only needed three, or maybe you even only needed two. And it turns out if you just focus on those couple things, you could drop this other thing, and now it's possible in a way it wasn't possible before. And Doug 100% was super helpful in that process, and there was a ton of back and forth on that. And in a way, maybe it's good that he had to struggle with some of the movements, because I think it forced us to get into the weeds of like, no, this is hard to move your hands in this way. What if we changed this thing and then we didn't have to do that? And there were certain movements where there was more or less of that. I mean, I don't know how well you know the piece. There's one movement where it's called CrossFit. It's only a couple minutes long, but it's got a bunch of like integrated into just like passive, like 16th note passage works, or like hitting the side of the instrument, hitting a resonator front, just making the scrapes on the the resonators, like different like noise sounds that are very seamlessly integrated into just like this kind of music, like 16th notes. For those who can't see the Zoom, I'm just waving my hand like a crazy person. It's like when composers demonstrate violins, like, yeah, you just do this, and then all the violinists are like,
that's not
what is
like this thing like I get like I understand like Paul Lansky does this a lot, and I love like you're like, yes, that's pretty close. But this is actually, in some respects, there's more mobility this way than there is with four mallets. Like this, four mallets is just like, oh my god, this is not an evolution. There's no evolutionary advantage to playing four mallet marimba. I'm just gonna put that out in the world. When the world is collapsing in on itself and fires are engulfing us all, four mallet marimba players are going to be the first to go, I think.
That's interesting, and this kind of gets into a little bit technical, maybe nerdy marimba technical land. But one thing I did learn in writing this piece for Vibes is that, like, I think composers, when they're taught how to write for marimba in like orchestration books, it's just like four mallets. It's better than two because you can do more notes, and that's sort of the end of the story. And every composer's like, yes, four mallets. Of course, I want four mallets. But then it's like there were some parts in the vibe movement piece where it's like, where Doug was like, well, if you just change this, you could almost do it in two. And I started to realize, well, there could be a tremendous value to that, because actually when you have two, there's such greater fluidity. Yeah. It's like it can just flow better. And like, if you don't need the four, like why you don't?
Well, it's something that we talk to composers a lot about, because there is. I'm trying to think if there was a technique on the vibe or on the violin where there was a two bow technique. All of a sudden now every violinist could bow two bows and get done. Like there's going to be something cool that comes from that. On the other hand, what it does do is limit some fluidity. The violinist now doesn't have the independence of going up to the high strings and staying down on the low strings at the same time. Like it's a little bit more cumbersome. And like drummers have two hands. Yeah. So you're always gonna get better drumming with two hands. Yeah. You're gonna get different drumming with four hands, and there's gonna be awesome shit that you can't do with two that you can do with four. But if what you're looking for is flow and energy, and that's the top of the spectrum for you, and like that's the number one priority. Yeah. That's the number one vitamin you're taking in this piece. Then two mallets. If four is getting in your way, or if you can't figure it out, take two mallets away and just be okay with a few notes going by, and see if the flow comes back. Because generally that's why four mallets often, even with me too, like I play worse with four mallets than I do with two. I hit fewer right notes with two mallets than I do with four. Yeah. But my flow sounds worse with four mallets than it does with two. So, pick your poison. And I feel like I feel like I'm a fairly accomplished musician. I have weaknesses that I could work on to get better, but I think by and large that's a pretty good. Well, so what I'm curious.
Is there any music where flow and energy is not the most important?
I don't know, but I'll bet there are composers who think that that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, of course, no one can make universal statements like that. But I think, for me, I can't think of music that I care about, in which the flow and energy isn't amazing. Like, maybe there's a lot of other stuff going on, but like that to me is like the primary thing in a lot of ways.
Well, I'm curious for you as a composer. You mentioned a little bit that Doug, he may not play the more virtuosic movements. You said that, and I immediately had this tinge of guilt of like, oh man, I do that to Dan Truman and Paul Lansky too. Like they wrote two steel drum solos for me that both of which the middle movements are really gorgeous and are something that in the heat of the battle, like, if somebody's like, hey, I need you to play a piece of Dan Truman's tomorrow, like, I can spend 10 minutes, work that piece back up. But it's like if somebody said, hey, I know that you have 3 mountains that Dan Truman gave you to climb, and I'd love for you to climb them tomorrow. One is Mount Everest, the other is K2, and then the third is like a hill that will take you an hour and a half to hike, and you'll be really exhausted when you get to the top, but you can definitely do it by tomorrow. Of course, I'm going to pick the third hill. I'm not an insane person,
Obviously, yeah.
But I think over the long haul, though, what that means is that those 2 harder movements just get less exposure. And I have this ethical quandary as a musician, like, what is my responsibility to the composer, but also just to music history? What is my responsibility to performers?
First of all, I think, this is ideally, and this won't happen to every piece, but ideally it should go out into the world. It should start to gain a life of its own. It should start to have people who didn't commission it play it, and have their own experience with it. And especially with a solo piece where there's multiple movements and it's kind of what you described, different levels, blah, blah, blah. What I found is happening to Economy of Means, and maybe to a certain extent I've seen this happen with other pieces of mine, is that different people are gravitating to different movements. Okay, yes, the vast majority of people play the 2 easiest movements. Yes. But the other ones are not ignored. And there are a handful of people who have taken on the hardest movements and killed it, slayed it. And I'm not shy from texting Doug. Like, for example, Cynthia Ye played like 4 movements from it, like on a Zoom concert a few weeks ago. And there's one movement she did, and I texted, I was like, Doug, I think Cynthia has you on this movement. You still own Chorale, which is this like slow, pretty one, but Cynthia has you on CrossFit. And he was like, cool, yeah. He's like, sure. And that's fine. That's as I think it should be, And like, do you know this guy Kyle Flens?
Yeah, of course. Kyle's a soci student.
Yeah, he's amazing. And like, so he played this one movement, Fast Notes, Long Tones, on the North Virtual Marathon. Mm-hmm. That's another killer hard movement. I have to be one of my favorites. I think it's one of the best in terms of like, there's all these cool things going on. But like, it's fucking hard. And not a lot of people play it. But for whatever reason, Kyle figured it out, and he can play the shit out of it.
Awesome.
He played it so smooth, and it sounded so good. And like, that's great. It worked for him. So my hope is that over time, these harder ones won't die because certain people will want to scale that mountain. Or maybe for certain people, it won't be K2 for them.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll be like something a little bit less.
Well, these are these are things I think that as a composer I want to warn. Do you know who Jihye Jung is?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Okay,
totally. Like I should have written this piece for Jihye.
No,
she would have done it.
Don't do that because no one will ever be able to play it. Because she's way too. I'm just kidding. Jihye is one of my heroines in the world, but she's also objectively speaking one of the best 4-mallet or mallet players on planet Earth.
Totally. I can't tell you how many times I've seen her play and just have my jaw drop.
So if you're a composer, absolutely work with Jihye. Just ask her like, can anybody else do this? Put that in your process a lot if you're working with Jihye.
Yes.
Well, Rob, I think we're coming down here. We've been talking now for coming up on exactly an hour, and I'm always surprised at how quickly time flies. And I can imagine the humidity level in your room rising. So let me get you out of there as quickly as I can here.
Okay.
What are you working on right now? I mean, you said you mentioned the film score, but what are you working on right now that folks can maybe keep an eye out for? That is, I mean, are you willing to talk about any sort of science projects you have growing in your fridge?
Yeah. So, the immediate thing I'll plug is that I have an album coming out in, I think, 2 weeks, which is called Soul House. And it's a piece that, it's about a 35-minute piece for a chamber quartet group. And it's coming out on New Amsterdam Records, August 7th. I'm really proud of it. And so that's something I'll plug. I don't know when this podcast will air, but if it's before or after,
it'll be before that.
Check it out. Okay, so that's one. As far as future projects, I've got the next thing I'm working on after the film thing is another percussion thing. It's not the only thing I write, but I'm writing a percussion duo for this group called the Arts Duo. And thinking
it's Mari and
Garrett.
Arnie. Yes, Garrett Arnie.
Yeah, and they want a big piece, like they want a long piece, and just trying to get my head around how I want to approach that. I mean, honestly, I've written a lot of percussion music, but every time I find it very difficult to get started because, first of all, there's so many choices. I still find it really weird to think about how to write for percussion because I'm a pianist, and like you get yourself into real trouble when you think like a pianist and you write for percussion. So like I have to always think about it. I have to slow it down to like a snail's pace to like really understand how the hands are moving. Otherwise, I end up writing things that are just impossible. But I'm excited about that piece, and I don't know. I think I've written enough percussion music to this point where I'm actually kind of approaching this piece. I think less. Maybe this. I hope this doesn't sound boring, and maybe it sounds old man or middle aged, but less about like let me find some new territory, and more about like let me take stock of all the approaches I've done. Like I've got this trio, Index Possibility. I've got the Vibes piece. I've got this piece, Down Down Baby, which is with a cello. I've got a marimba solo that I don't think you've heard, but is got some things going on, and like all these different approaches. And I'm trying to think, well, what can I like maybe take from that and that I think really works really well, and like kind of consolidate and make it more of like this coherent statement. Which I don't know, maybe that sounds boring, but to me it sounds really exciting. Actually,
It doesn't sound.
I feel like
It doesn't sound boring at all. I mean, do you steal from yourself? Do you steal things from other
totally.
pieces?
Absolutely. I steal things for myself all the time. And I see that as a positive part of the creative process. I think too much emphasis in school is on like making up new shit when I think actually if you look at almost any other discipline, it's all about building a body of work, building up like, right?
Plagiarism,
Like
plagiarism and appropriation are okay when they are stealing from yourself. Like
100%.
plagiarize and appropriate your own self first. Get good at that before you do it from anybody else. And if you can do that, then I think you probably will find that you don't have to steal from anybody else. But just start with yourself first.
It also starts to get more interesting.
Yeah.
And it can be wonderful when you discover something new. But like when you take something you've done before and you do it again in a different way, and then again in a different way, the different iterations start to lead you into places you never would have arrived at before. And I think gets more depth, and it could be really cool. So. Yeah, I'm kind of more self-consciously thinking about that with this duo, but yeah, I mean the film score, I don't want to underplay it. It's a significant creative project for me. I'm really psyched about it, and I have no idea when it's going to come out. It keeps getting delayed because they're going to premiere at film festivals, but they all keep getting canceled.
Right.
But it's basically done, and I'm super proud of it. And one day it'll come out, and I'll tell everyone about it.
Are you allowed to? You're not allowed to say what film it was for?
I can say what it's for. It's a documentary on Charlie Chaplin.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah, and it's I don't think they have a title yet, but it's a really cool movie. It kind of goes into depth onto his upbringing, different aspects of his life, both positive and negative, the whole arc of his story, which is unbelievable story. I mean, he came from just he was an orphan, basically living in slums and begging. To like the most famous person on the planet, to being exiled from the United States because he was a suspected communist. It's just like such an incredible story that spans like these key points in like the 20th century history. And
that film, there's a film of him. Is it The Dictator or something like that?
The Great Dictator.
The Great Dictator. That one is striking. I mean, especially. I mean, I remember that came out just prior to the 2016 elections, or became more like it was getting circulated a lot. Or after the election or whatever, and going back and watching that every once in a while, I was like, oh man, that is oddly relevant to today.
Yeah, totally. So that's been really cool, and the cool thing about that project is they sought me out for my music. It's not at all feeling like I have to change who I am or anything, but they came to me, and like it's crazy. Like they listened, they were like, send us every single recorded piece you have that you've ever done, and we're gonna pour. And they poured through it, and they like. Took some of it to use for some of the things, and some of it was starting off points for other things. But like it really felt like it was coming from my idiom, so to speak. And so I feel like that's definitely it's a serious creative project. But
that's awesome.
Yeah,
that's awesome, man. Well, where can folks find out about where is your website? Where can folks find out more specifically about you?
RobertHonstein.com.
That's HONSTIN.
STEIN.
Sorry.
Yeah. And it's funny, I have an MP3 of me saying my name because sometimes I get asked it, so I can just text it out, and it's like, here you go.
Rob
like someone. Yeah,
I think it's good. It's good. I mean, I have a.
But I don't care. People call me Stein. The only one that pisses me off is I don't understand it, but something that happens is people will call me Hornstein, like Robert Hornstein. I'm just like, where do you get like it doesn't even like I totally get like you can't figure out Steen or Stein, sure, whatever. But like Horn, like
I get
there's
Quinlan.
no R. Like
I get Quinlan sometimes, and then I got Kien. Like somebody looks at me, I'm like, you think I'm French?
I know it's just.
I'm wearing a
I
C
mean,
on
I
my
think
hat.
so,
It's for Cleveland. There's
I
no
just
Cleveland,
think, I just think
France.
so. Yeah, right. So people just look at names and like the series of letters don't make sense to them, and then the whole thing just becomes like a scramble, and
Yeah.
it's just like whoa.
It's like, did you listen to
Yeah.
the John Travolta thing where he tried to announce,
Yeah.
what was her name, from Wicked,
Oh,
Adele,
yeah. Right. I forget
Adina
her name.
Menzel, and
Yeah,
he announced her
Adina Menzel. Yeah.
Adele Kazim.
Menzel. It's so
Anyway,
bad.
Rob, on that
Yeah,
note, buddy,
right.
this has been a pleasure. I really appreciate catching up.
Thank you.
I have, my policy is I have an open door policy. If you have when your record comes out on August 7th or your movie comes out,
Yeah.
I would love to connect with you and talk more about
Absolutely.
it. And when we emerge, if we emerge from the other side of this pandemic ever,
We will.
we can do this in person.
We will.
But until then,
Right,
Rob, I really, really appreciate your time. And any final words before we wrap up?
No, this is great. I admire your podcast. I mean, I get obsessive with them, and there was a period where I listened to almost every single one of yours that you did, up to like somewhere, I don't remember, but then I totally lost track of the coronavirus time.
It's okay. I'm not. I'm not so sure that I would recommend. I think I started every one of those podcasts out with "Do not hold me to anything." We're all figuring this out together.
Well,
Whatever we say during this Corona cast is only hold us liable during that day.
I mean,
and so there's a lot of crazy shit in there.
I can't. It's my podcast time has gone away. I can't listen to them anymore because I used to listen to them commuting and like walking around like in the city or whatnot.
me
But
too.
now I have two kids, a 3 and a 5-year-old, and we have a babysitter now. We got one again, but for the first 12 weeks, it was just a total disaster of like no childcare and like my wife and I trading off working. It was just like I can't listen. I don't listen to them anymore.
That's
but
fine.
One day,
mine are
it'll be
not
this
safe.
treasure trove
Mine are not
going
safe
into.
for children's ears. So I appreciate maybe keep them away from it. There's a few f-bombs in there.
Oh, that's cool.
I don't want to get them in trouble. But Rob,
Okay. Yeah,
you stay safe, stay healthy, and it was an absolute pleasure. And I look forward to catching up with you again soon. Okay, buddy.
Me too. All right. Talk to you later.
Thanks, Rob. Bye.
Thank you.
Okay, this podcast is brought to you by Liquid Drum. LiquidDrum.com down in Waco, Texas, run by Todd Meehan. Amazing percussion videos, education, and hilarity ensues when you go to LiquidDrum.com. Also, DunleavyPans.com down in Waco, Texas, down near Philadelphia. Kyle Dunleavy builds and tunes all of the steel drums that I teach and play on, just not only at Princeton, but at NYU and in So Percussion as well. DUNLEAVY Pans.com. Also, if you've ever wondered where the steel drum comes from, what role it plays in society and Caribbean societies, just you want to learn more about the steel band, go to paninmotion.com. Four of my friends from Brooklyn run that organization: Kendall, Trisha, Jerry, and Orisha. Check them out. And also, if you want steel pan related merch, hats, shirts, go to Mango Chow on Facebook. Alejandre over there at Mango Chow makes amazing merch that is steel drum sort of related. Check him out. Amazing stuff, and support the advocacy of the steel pan, especially in Brooklyn. All right, hope you enjoyed that conversation. I hope you're all doing well and staying safe, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.